Welcome back, HD Nation, for another episode of the Adventure Box podcast. We're going back into Rome today, and we're going to be talking about some great things. This is the start of the Republic. Now, a lot of people have some misunderstandings of how Rome was established, but we're going to get more into that, including the bringing together of all of the different groups that were there, and also creating a republic. And I teased it last time, how it all started with murder. So here we go. Let's get into it. Okay, here we go. So the first thing to know is today we're dividing into a pivotal era in this part, in Roman history. And basically laid the foundation into modern democracy. Now, as I said before, when we were talking about it last month, the Greeks started democracy. They taught about it. Everything was great, teaching about it. But now we're getting into the Roman era and how they actually modified democracy into civic laws and political tensions that would actually spur up a lot during the Roman Republic. So today we're going to be talking about the fall of Roman monarchy. I shouldn't say Rome's monarchy, Italy's monarchy, and you'll see why. And why Romans rejected kings forever. No more kings at that point. They were done with kings. Now, yes and no. Because you know there are Caesars and the power structures. You know what? It says that, what do they say? Power corrupts and ultimate power corrupts ultimately. Something like that. Yes, it does. And so, though Italy liked to say we don't have kings, they did have Caesars, which basically acted like kings or dictators. So, yeah. Then you also had Mussolini. Mussolini, yes. So, not a king, but fairly close to being all-powerful ruler in Italy. But we'll get into that later on. Okay. The next thing we're going to be talking about, we won't talk about it now because that's way later on. That's like another unit, another series of history. So the second thing we're going to be talking about is how the new government, the Republic, was structured. And the third one, the long and dramatic struggle between the elite, we can call them the patricians, and the common plebeians. Yes, sorry. And why the Roman Republic, from its very start, was a mixture of noble ideas and fierce internal conflict, we'll say. So, okay, here we go. Let's start into it. Let's talk about the overthrow of the monarchy. To do this, I'm going to bring up a map for you. Same map we had on Tuesday. Okay, so the year is now 509 BC. Rome was ruled by a king, or at least the area. This is actually an Etruscan king. Now, it did not rule the whole thing. It ruled a good portion of it. So, there was 7 kings, actually. Rome was ruled by these kings, one after another. And if we believe the traditional lists, then some of these included Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, or Tarquin the Proud, let's call him. So that was actually his other name, Tarquin the Proud. And he lived up in, he lived in Rome and lived up to his name. So according to Roman legend, again, a lot of things are in legend because we weren't there. Tarquin ruled as a tyrant. He ignored the Senate. Yes, there was actually a Senate at the time, or a group of people that would actually make laws for the Roman area. They would tax. They taxed the people heavily, and I guess this could have been Tarquin or the Senate, but everyone was taxed very heavily, and they relied on violence, basically to keep everyone in line. The tipping point, though, This is the part I was talking about. This is the murder that started it all, started the Roman Republic. So the tipping point was when his son, Tarquin's son, his name was Sextus Tarquinius, he committed a horrible, like, especially back in Rome, though it is horrible today, it was like you would be killed for that. You wouldn't go to jail for it, you would be killed for it. He assaulted a noblewoman by the name of Lucretia. So Lucretia was a Roman noblewoman who people loved. She was well known. She was well liked. Sextus wanted her for himself. Lucretia, she was married. And so at one point, Sextus tried to have his way. And because of what had happened, Lucretia, I still can't say her name, Lucretia, she gathered her family around. She said, please come, everyone. And while everyone was around, she told them what had happened. And then she killed herself. She killed herself because her name was defiled. She was defiled. And so this led to a man by the name of Lucius Junius Brutus, who everyone thought was a fool, that he was simple-minded, that he could not do specific things. Because his uncle was Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, who was, now we call him Tarquin. Tarquin was his uncle. Now, Brutus was actually named for the throne. I keep doing this. Brutus was named for the throne. He was supposed to be the leader of Rome. But because he knew his uncle wanted it so badly that he would kill, he made himself a fool. He was very smart. And so because he did this, he actually made himself to know that, or made no one know how smart he was. Until the day that Lucretia committed suicide and died. And then he grabs the dagger that she stabbed herself with and goes up and says, I will revenge what has been done. And he does. Actually, what he does is he pushes Tarquin, his whole family, and all of his loyalists out of the city. He declares that no king shall ever rule Rome again. And by doing that, he pushed the king out. Now, this would actually start many, many wars, and you can read about them in the textbook. But he pushed them out, and they wanted revenge. Now, Brutus was now to be king. Well, again, he said no more kings. So he was supposed to be a ruler of them. Well, he can't be a king, so what are you going to call him? Maybe we can call him a Caesar. So this moment, whether it was mythical, legendary, or historical, or whatever mix, became a moral foundation for the Republic. No more kings. Kings were out. Citizens were in to rule. Power would be shared, not inherited. Now, interesting to know, Brutus was from the bloodline of many of the Caesars afterwards, because even though he was not, he was not made Caesar, he was called a consul. Even though he was not actually made king over it, and he passed it down through his heritage, those that were noble shared a lot of the same bloodlines. So no king, no passing it down to your next generation, but most likely they're going to be king anyways. But the citizens got to make more of the rules. So from here, you actually have the new era, which was the Roman Republic. People were to rule. Brutus got his power by giving it out to everyone else and still being able to be the head of everything. So this would last nearly 500 years. That's right. The Roman Republic would last until the time of Caesar Augustus. That was the guy. But we're going to talk about him later on, like in 2 weeks. So from its founding in 509 BC, that was like the full establishment, up to the time of the Punic Wars, starting in about 264, there was basically peace. To some extent. Some extent. Because one of the other things that happened was a lot of the neighboring kingdoms, Rome was only a section of the area. Rome, going up into a little bit the Etruscans, they were established. But all these others wanted the power. But Rome itself was now a republic. So let's talk about some of the key developments that happened during this time. And it gets a lot more into it in the text. We just don't have the time because we're going to be focusing more on how the structure of the republic was put together. And we'll talk a little bit about it tomorrow, or sorry, on next week, on more of the history of like the wars and such. But in these years, well, okay, before we go there, let's go into the neighboring kingdoms. So Rome gradually expanded its control over its other kingdoms, whether it's from marriages, because some marriages came in, through battles, or through diplomacy, such as the Etruscans. They were mostly taken over by war. Why war? Because the Etruscans the king was kicked out. It was his family that ruled Rome. Out of a mutual agreement, they were pushed out. They wanted back in. So there's many wars coming through that time. The Republic started to forge alliances and colonies with the others. The Latins also fought for a time, but Rome's biggest battles weren't on a battlefield. They were basically in their own forums. They were in their own republic, which is why we'll talk about the structures. And they slowly added all of these other groups to them. So it wasn't exactly peace. And even inside Rome, it wasn't peace. I don't know why I said that. Because the Roman beginning was all about wars. It was taking on from other people, taking them on in battle and such. Okay, so now let's go into this structure, because we're not going to go into that. We'll go into that next week, into the history of the wars and such. But let's talk about the structure of the Republic. The Senate, the consuls, which is, like I was saying, Caesar, Brutus was a consul, and the assembly. Okay, sorry, my neck is killing me for some reason. The early Roman Republic was a blend of aristocrats, aristocracy, royalty, basically, nobles, democracy, which is the people, and then tradition. Those blended together is what basically ruled the kingdom. So, wow. Oh, this is why everyone needs to go out and do things off the screen, because if you look at the screen too long, you're going to kill your back and your neck and your eyes. Oh, this is why Historical Conquest is a great game, because you are not on a computer. And everyone needs to get off of a computer for some reason. I'm sorry. I went into a little rant, but oh, you know what? My back is killing me. My neck is killing me. And you're going to hear about it. So let's go back into it. Okay, the three parts of how the Republic is run. You first had this Senate. Senate was the most powerful and respected body in the Republic. They were people that were voted, and they were representatives. Their major responsibility was to make the laws. It was made up of 300 men, not women. Voting and everything happened with men. Mostly the patricians. Now, as I said, these were the wealthy landowners and the nobles. So the land was owned by specific people. And like a feudal system, it was made for other people to farm, and the patricians just paid rent. They were the landlords of the time, but not of the houses. Well, they probably had houses too, but of the land. And so to be noble, you'd most likely be a landowner. Though it couldn't pass the Senate, they could not pass laws, they could only make them. The Senate advised the consuls, being Brutus and all those afterwards, and they controlled the state's finances and even handled foreign policy, but they did not actually pass the laws. That had to be done by the assembly. The Senate's served for life. They go in, they're there for life. I am so grateful for how our government is set up that we get actually vote for them every 2, 4, or 6 years. You know, it's the best system that we could have put together, because no other system in the whole world, I would say, is set up like that. Though it couldn't pass laws, it could make them. It would put them together. This was great because they actually had the ability to have somebody sit down and put these laws together, but then they had to pass it over to the assembly. Now this becomes a big struggle for them later on, and we're going to talk about, I think it's called the Grussi brothers. Stay tuned for that. That's next week. But the structure basically falls apart when certain senators don't like how the Senate is passing bills, or passing it off to the Senate, or not passing it, to the assembly, or not passing it to the assembly. Now the consuls was basically like the executive branch for the U.S. government, but of the republic. And they were to lead, basically it was led by 2 consuls. And these were elected every year. Oh, wait a second. So our consuls, or our president, we elect every 4 years. In this, they elected him every year. This meant, you know what, seriously, why assassinate someone when you can wait till a year later and get him out of office, vote him out of office? Now, they become very powerful with their strength in with the citizenship, so sometimes you could not push them out. And there were assassinations that came up, and we will talk about them later on. But because of these consuls, you basically get rid of them if you wanted to, or if the people really wanted to, fairly quickly. Basically think of them as like co-presidents. They had different responsibilities or different areas that they watched over. The consuls would lead the army. That was their number one task. They would enforce the laws. Wait. That's really close to what our executive branch does. He implements the laws and enforces them, because he has the Federal Bureau of Investigations. He has the federal, he has the Department of Justice. He's not the courts, though. And in early Rome, ancient Rome, they did not actually have a court system. So the consul worked a little bit as the court system. And they presided over the Senate and the Assembly. So they were the one power over top of them, which is fairly close to what the president does. The vice president can actually sit in the House and could be the Speaker of the House. He just gives that ability to someone else because he has so many other things to do in the U.S. government. So they were crucial. Each consul could veto the other. That would be interesting. I don't like this bill. I like this bill. Well, I'm going to veto you. So where does it go? It doesn't go anywhere. This prevents basically one man from becoming too powerful. Again, until later on. When we get into the Caesars, we're going to talk about those later on. So after 1 year, they stepped down, and this was a stark contrast to the kingship, but you could be voted back in. So you could rule for like 4 or 5 years, but every year they would have to vote you in. So this system was divided or designed for checks and balances, much like the U.S. government is set up. And we have the legislative branch. They make the laws and pass the laws. The executive branch, they enforce the laws. They implement the laws. They are the executive over the laws and over the government, including how the money is used, even though the the Congress is the one, or the House is where the purse starts. They give the money to the president, and the president is the one that uses it for certain reasons, especially those that are named by the Congress. Okay, and then we have the judicial branch, which is judges, judicial, judge. They're the ones that basically say this is legal, this is illegal, and such. Whether it's the laws that are passed or the people in the country. And so that's why you have one Supreme Court that looks over all the other courts. So these are a little bit different. Here they have an assembly, no court system. These are the citizens. These are the popular assemblies. They were democratically elected, and this is where the republic basically gets its name, republic. Now, the republic is a republic basically means you're represented, which is the Senate. Democracy, which is a Greek word, basically a Greek structure, came from Greece. And that basically is where the people voted. The assembly is where the people were. The citizens, free Roman men, voted in tribes or what they call centuries on laws, elections, and war declarations. Wait, that sounds like our legislation, our legislature. Except these were, again, they were voted on, so they're very much like it. They were representatives of the rest of the people, the rest of the citizens. So you could almost say this is like the Congress, or mostly the House. So the House is like the assembly. The Senate, the Senate in Rome, they ruled for life, is like our Senate, except our Senate can be voted out. So we fixed a lot of the issues found in Rome. So there were differences in the assemblies. There were different assemblies. So, and I won't go through all of them, but one of the assemblies elected consuls and declared war. Another one passed laws and elected lesser officials. And then the last one was assembly just for the plebeians. The plebeians were the citizens, the lower class. You had the patricians, who were the upper class, the nobles, and the plebeians, the lower class. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about the conflict of the orders of the patricians and the plebeians. And then we'll end this session. Okay, so if the Roman Republic was revolutionary in structure, it still had deep inequalities. So from the start, powers rested with the patricians, the nobles. You had the consuls, were most likely going to be the nobles, or consuls were going to most likely be the patricians, and also the Senate were going to be the patricians. The noble families who claimed the descendancy from the Roman founding fathers. Those were the patricians. Now, you also had the others, everyone else, the farmers, the laborers, the soldiers, the craftsmen. These were called the plebeians. Now, this led to a lot of political struggle. As I said, they had peace after a certain time. Not true. Because they had a lot of war on the outside, all throughout Italy, what would become Italy. And they also had a lot of struggles inside. And this is known as the conflict of the orders, which basically played out for centuries, over centuries. So the plebeians, let's go over their grievances. They were excluded from public office. Wait a second. These are the people. Why should they be excluded from public office? I'm not talking about the assembly. We're talking about the Senate and the consuls. Banned. They were banned from marrying patricians. Whoa. You're going to get that far into the rules that you're going to make it so that you can't intermarry? It's because they were the royal bloodline of the Roman founders. This is why you must not marry us. Okay, so they were banned. I can't talk today. Banned from marrying the patricians. They were also subject to unwritten laws. Wait, what? You cannot just tell us that there's a law here and have it not be passed by the assembly. That's the purpose of it. So yeah, unfair enforcement. and often in debt and at risk from becoming enslaved. Debt slavery. Italy was known for its debt slavery. If you did not pay back your debts, you were enslaved. Now remember, this is not a new thing. This is not a new thing to be known. Debt slavery in Rome was well known because if you read the Bible, you're going to read about it there. If you learn about the slavery in here, it wasn't slavery as in like Africans coming into Italy being enslaved. No. These were people that were in debt, had to work off their debts. Actually, it somewhat sounds plausible, or like something that would actually be a normal thing. If you can't pay back your debts being free, then you pay back your debts enslaved. I'm not saying it's a good thing. I'm saying that it does make sense somewhat. That instead of going to jail for your debts, you work it off by the person that you lent it to. But that means all the nobles have all the slaves, and most of the plebeians have the risk of becoming slaves. That sucks. Okay, so starting in 494 BC, the plebeians staged the first secession of the plebs. Love the name, plebs. And withdrawing from the cities and refusing to fight in the Roman army. Wow, this really created a stir. This was a huge stir. They demanded rights, legal protections, and a voice in the government. Rome had to listen to them. They had to. There was no way around it. This was their people. Their citizens. Their normal citizens. The major reform from this conflict was because of the tribunes of the plebs. It was created, it basically created elected officials. The plebs, the plebeians, the plebs, I love it, who voted, basically vetoed laws and protected plebeian rights. There was 12 tables, that's what they called it, the 12 tables, Romans' first written laws, posted publicly so no one could manipulate them. This was one of the other reforms that they pushed and was passed because Rome couldn't do anything without the plebeians or the plebs. Love it. Over time, the plebs won these rights to hold higher office, marry patricians. I still don't understand how that could be a law. And passing laws. Basically, this is how the assembly became more citizens, the rights of the citizens. And binding on all citizens. So all laws had to be passed by the assembly and had to be enforced on all citizens, including the patricians. So by 287 BC, with the what they call the Lex Hortensia, decisions of the plebeian assembly became binding on everyone. This was a huge win for the common citizens. Nothing else in Roman history was ever so big as this battle for rights. This is what actually made the Republic. Because before it felt like a republic, but the plebs did not believe it, did not feel like there was a republic, that they had a voice. You know, the taxation without representation. Yep, same thing. So by this time, by the 287 BC, they won their rights. This starts off a big thing because the patricians do not like this. Heck, I don't know why they don't like can't marry a patrician. Golly, I still don't see how that could be a law. And this will start up another hornet's nest, which we will talk about next week. So let's do a recap. Early Roman Republic was a time of vision, conflict. It basically gave us the system of checks and balances, the Republic. There was the assembly, the consul, and the Senate. It also created a government that, despite flaws, responded to pressure from below, from the citizens. And it was a lesson. Political power isn't always given. It is often won through struggles and conflict. So Rome was no utopia. It was not a utopian civilization. But in these centuries, being ancient Rome, it built a system that inspired everything from republican revolutions, the French Revolution, the American Revolution, there's so many different revolutions, Germany and such, to modern constitutions. These all came from the idea started in Rome around 300 BC. That's pretty cool. That is pretty cool to know that our Constitution, a mixture of all different things, but actually she could find some origin back to Italy, back to Rome. This is why I like this. There's so much history built in to this time period. And we'll go into the wars. We won't leave them. We'll let you see all the wars and such. But before we do that next week, I want to ask you a question. This is your engagement question. What part of the Roman Republic's structure do you think worked best or worst? Would you have been a patrician or a plebeian fighting for your rights? Okay, everyone's going to say, well, I want to be wealthy. I want to be a landowner. So of course I'm going to be a patrician. But what side would you rather have been on? What side would you have fought on? Tell me that. That's what I want to hear. What part of the structure was the best? The Republic's structure? And would you have been a patrician or a plebeian? Which side would you support in this? Not really what you would want to be, but what side would you support? So thank you so much for joining us on this Adventure Box podcast. We will catch you next time. That would be next Monday as we talk about early American history. And then Tuesday, we will continue with Rome. So thanks so much for joining us. We will catch you next time. Take care, everyone. Bye. If you have any comments or questions, add them to the comments below. Otherwise, we'll see you tomorrow, actually. Take care. Bye.